This episode is sponsored by Champagne Paul Roger. Champagne Paul Roger was founded in 1849 by an enterprising 18-year-old, Monsieur Paul Roger. Great Britain became the premier market for his brand of champagne, and from humble beginnings, it is now famous throughout the world. In all that time, Paul Roger has remained family-owned and independent. The house owns 92 hectares of prime vineyards and sits atop cellars that are over 7.5 kilometers long. At their deepest point, they're 33 meters below street level, allowing for a long, cool fermentation. The unique facilities and location contribute to Paul Roger's incomparable quality, purity of fruit, and famously fine bubbles. Paul Roger has sponsored the Barbarians since 2018 and has a rich tradition of enjoying and supporting domestic and international rugby. Both the BaaBaas and Paul Roger have a heritage that stretches back to the 19th century, as well as a shared commitment to sporting excellence and the exciting idea of champagne rugby. In 2024, Champagne Paul Roger will toast its 175th anniversary.
Hello and welcome back to the Barbarians show, alongside me, Ryan Wilson, and a Wallabies superstar in the shape of Quade Cooper. Quade, back in the Barbarians jersey. How good?
Yeah, pretty fun. I remember the first time I played, it was an exciting week, and this one's a little bit different. Playing over here in England and in London, I think it holds a little bit more weight. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, that first time was 6 years ago down in Sydney, where the Barbarians toured down there and played against the Wallabies. So that was big for you. But you mentioned coming up to London in May. Bit of warmth. You're not used to being up in this neck of the woods at this time of year.
Yeah, got a bit of a fright getting off the plane. I think it was like around 8 o'clock at night. Getting off, sun was still up. Hadn't even seen the sun here before, for starters. And then coming out to training and stuff, and mate, the sun's been out the whole time. So thinking of extending my trip, which is a first here in England. Yeah,
I love it. Rather than escaping back to the Aussie summer.
Don't tell Eddie that, he'll kill you if you say extending your trip down there.
Yeah, well, you never know, mate. Like it's a beautiful place, and Eddie spent a long enough time here, so I'm sure he'll be understanding.
Boy, by the way, why does he sound so rough? Was he on the beers big time last night?
Not too sure. I don't know if it was that or COVID.
That doesn't exist. That doesn't exist anymore.
Might get this shut down.
Yeah, no. We'll release it after, so the game doesn't get cancelled like ours did.
You mentioned it, Eddie. Now you're Wallabies boss, right? But it goes. You go back a long time, right, to your very first days in the professional game.
Yeah, brings a little bit of a smile and a little bit of a tear to my eye as well. I would have been 17 at the time, so 2006 when I debuted for the Reds, and Eddie was my first professional coach. So, funny how the world works, and a full 360 moment. I think it's around 18 years later. So,
compare that, right? So, Quade Cooper 2000. What did you say? 2006, right? Quade Cooper 2006. Eddie Jones 2006. Where are the differences now to looking back at those younger men?
Mate, it's black and white.
Really?
So for myself, I can really only speak on my own experiences, but where I was as a rugby player, as a man, on my journey in life, back then it was, mate, the only care in the world that you had was, what you're doing the next day. Like you weren't looking too much past that. And then, as I said, come a full 360, 18 years later, the places I've been, the things I've been fortunate enough to achieve, the stadiums I've played in, and never in my wildest dreams would I have been able to imagine where I'd be today, even sitting here in London with the game ahead on Sunday. So it's been a wild journey, and super grateful for every part of that.
The relationship with Eddie, then, that must have changed a little bit to when you first met him. And how's he changed as a coach, and your relationship grown with him?
Yeah, I mean, well, I can't really comment on how he's changed as a coach. I haven't been coached by him just yet.
Oh yeah,
but,
of course.
At the time, I'm sure that the difficult thing, when I look back, with hindsight, is that he was inherited a team that had a nucleus of guys. Myself, Will, our centres were they would have been 19 or 20. So the average age of that team at the time was around 21. So I was just turned 18. So I was 17 when I first started getting coached by Eddie. Still at high school. So 2006, my last year of high school. Yeah, so I just look at that and I think, mate, it's just been a wild journey. And as I said, I'm excited about the opportunity of getting coached by Eddie. Because when he inherited that team, it would have been a whole lot of frustrations. He come from coaching the Wallabies, so guys, Bernie Larkham, Gregan, these guys who have been through everything on the world stage in terms of rugby, achieved everything, and now he's got a bunch of high school kids.
Yeah.
So it's chalk and cheese. So those high school kids need nurturing. So they need basically to be told everything. They're looking for all the answers. They're looking to learn. Whereas, the guys like Stephen Larkham and that, they had done majority of their learning. So you just had to manage the personalities. I know it sounds easy and there would have been a lot more to it, but a team of school kids is a whole lot different a coach than...
I think it's easier maybe though, trying to nurture rather than look after some of those egos at the top.
Well, I
think
think
an easier job.
The hard thing though is that if you think about any parent, right, looking after kids is a 24-hour, 7 days a week type thing. Looking after the best of the best, mate. Like if you have a pet, feed them, see you later. Children, on the other hand, mate, you got to do everything for them.
How was Quade Cooper? Yeah, exactly.
Starting to worry now.
Exactly. You've
Left
got a
them
very
home.
good wife, Ryan.
Yeah.
How would a 17, 18-year-old Quade Cooper been to nurture? How big a challenge would that have been for coaches?
Yeah, well, it was challenging enough for my parents, let alone for my coaches. The thing was that, in some ways I probably thought I knew more than I did, but also I was just a kid. I was just trying to navigate being a professional athlete, but also trying to be a kid as well. Yeah. I remember one of the first things I asked Eddie was, can I go to schoolies? And if you're not aware of what schoolies is, it's when everybody finishes high school in Australia, especially Queensland and New South Wales. So the first week is New South Wales, second week is Queensland. So it's a week where all the school kids go down to the Gold Coast and basically party for a full week. And I remember like ringing Eddie and saying like, oh, hey mate, can I go to schoolies? And he's like, no, you have training. Be at training on Monday. And I sort of remember thinking like, mate, well, I just want to go to schoolies. Like I just want to, and it was one of those moments where the awareness, I just had no idea. Like professional athlete it's a job, but it's also a lifestyle. And I'm just trying to be a kid at the same time. So I couldn't really understand why. And I ended up going for 2 days, but just getting a lift back to training straight from, schoolies.
Does he know that?
Oh, now he does.
Yeah, I know. That's so good.
When it comes to that, I guess now as a senior player, some of the youngsters who are around you coming through, how much has that kind of given you the tools to be able to manage some of the young whippersnappers? And I guess there are a few of them within this squad this week. Yeah,
I mean the thing is that the journey that I'd sort of been on, I've made every mistake under the sun. So my job is never as an older player, as a more experienced player, is to tell people what's right or wrong. It's just try and lead by example. And when you have conversations with boys, tell them about your experiences. And when I was at a position where you have a decision to go left or go right, and I went left, I can just tell them of my experiences when I went left. And maybe if I had had the opportunity to do it again, would I go right? Probably. And again, so you have those conversations and you tell them about that, and then you let them make the decision for themselves with that knowledge to go, okay, he went left, it turned out like that, I'm still going to go left. And that's up to them. And
from your perspective this week, obviously you've come back from a time injured in Japan alongside Samu Karevi, obviously in the Barbarians jersey. How's Eddie framed this opportunity for you? Obviously the new man at the helm for the Wallabies in a World Cup year and with a short build up. How's he kind of framed this opportunity for you to go out there and express yourselves in the Barbarians as a springboard?
Yeah, I think that any game for the Barbarians is an opportunity to be able to go out there and express yourself at the highest level. It's the best platform to be able to go out and do that.
But in the way that you do it as well, I think, more so.
Yeah, well, for me, it's just, I love the game of rugby from the essence of most people will look at my highlights and stuff like that and say, oh, the way you play the game, it's all off the cuff. I'm totally different, have a totally different approach, and I like the structure to the game. I like understanding the game at a very high level, so that when you go out and play those things, they're not off the cuff, they're there and you mean to do them. When I was younger, yes, a lot of it was just off the cuff and I was just having a crack and rolling the dice. Whereas now, I understand the game at a level and I know before it's going to happen what position I'm going to get into and what options I'm going to have. So it makes it a whole lot easier to make those decisions and be able to express yourself. And to have the opportunity to play with Samu is just a great opportunity for us, like from a selfish point of view, to be able to get out on the field with a guy that I'll potentially have the opportunity to play international rugby with again. So I'm going to make the most of that, whether I play 40 minutes or whatever, even just training today, being able to be next to him, have some conversations, pick his brain on what he's seen, what he's learnt from his experiences in Suntory, and then hopefully that translate in a few months' time.
Going back to your role then in the Wallabies, just quickly, you spent a bit of time with Dave Rennie, and he would have lent on men like you, and I spent a good old week in the BaaBaas with Rabs, James O'Connor, and he's almost, I feel like he's got the same aura about you, like he's been through it and done it, and he's like, I want to help people learn which direction to take. Yeah. Dave would have lent on players like that. Dave would have pulled players like that into the squad because they're the men he wants in there. The men that have been there and done it. I'm guessing, well, you're hoping Eddie's the same. He wants to make sure he takes from your learnings and make sure some of those younger guys are coming in and learning from that.
Yeah, I mean that within those situations, it's one of the things is to continue to make sure that. So for me, it's not about trying to better myself on my journey. So I can use this as an opportunity to help someone else, right? It's something that I continue to work in. As I said, if I can set the example for those guys, so if I go into the squad, and I had this conversation with Dave, I know that when I got into that squad, I had a great opportunity with Noah Lalicia, to be around him, be able to train with him day in and day out, and we got to compete against each other as well. So the learnings were both ways, so it wasn't just a one-way street. So I think that's the most important part, is that when you come in as an older guy, just because you've got some experience in that, always keep an open mind and understand that it's a two-way street. So it's not just me pushing my ideas or my lessons on someone else. So I think it is good and great to have those type of guys in the squad. You need it for balance. So myself, James, there's a lot of guys who have been through some crazy experiences, to say the least, and over our time. So I'm sure that Eddie will lean on those in some way, shape or form. Doesn't guarantee that you'll be part of the squad, and that's something that we've got to keep in mind.
You got some stories to tell, don't you? We'll be writing a book at some stage, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's some stories that'll go into a book some way, shape or form, or a podcast or something like that. Mate, as you said, like that Barbarians tour in Australia, that was a heck of a time.
For that, amazing.
Yeah, it was. And the rugby that we played. Yeah, it was.
Yeah. So you're leading by example.
Alan Evans coached the team that week, didn't he? And he's like so he was the Aussie coach in the '87, the first ever Rugby World Cup, and it re-engaged like 25 years on. After that, as head coach, he's now a radio personality down there. As mega.
Mate, Alan Jones, in that game, like he literally in that moment, that 1 week that I spent with him, changed my whole perspective of the game. And I always tell the story to people, because what happened was he come in our first training session, he's yelling to the boys, keep the ball up off the ground, just maul it, do all this, and the boys are coming to me and saying, what's he talking about? Like, this isn't the 80s. Like, the rugby's a whole lot different now. And I was trying to interpret what he's saying, and he kept saying things, and then it just clicked in my mind. I said, what he's trying to say is essentially he doesn't want rucks. Like, so what we have, if you think about rugby nowadays, there's so many rucks. So every time there's a ruck, so the game's quite structured. You're going to run here, so there's going to be a ruck there. Now, if you're a defensive coach, what's the first thing you need to set up a defensive drill? You need a ruck. So now if you limit the amount of rucks, well, how is the defence going to be able to get set? You can't set a 1-2-3, -1-2-3 if there's no ruck. So I started to understand what he was trying to say, and then I ended up playing club rugby that year. So I just took this philosophy and I said, I'm just going to trial this in club rugby. So we started with trying to have no rucks or as least as possible. In one of the games, we got it down to 32 rucks in one game. So if you imagine that, you close your eyes and you imagine what 32 rucks in a game.
I'm in the village in Fiji. That's where I am now.
It's like Fiji Sevens, right?
I'm in the village in Fiji.
So if you put that in, but you add like structure to it. So there's confines to the game that you start to go, okay, but then there's things that you add into it. So if we have low rucks, if we try and keep our rucks around 40. So like that was like the magic number for us was like around 40. And we're like, okay, so the passes in the game, and I'll just use it for an easy number. If there's 100 passes in the game, what's the balance between backs and forwards? So we trialed a few things, and I said one game I just wanted as many. Every time a forward catches the ball, I want you to pass it. So we ended up getting the percentage up to about 50-50 each. But the game was very lateral because there was no go forward. So then it was like, okay, we need to just rethink this again. And we get that to like a sort of 70-30, 80-20 split. So out of 100 passes, if you're getting 80 and 20 or 70 and 30, was a great balance. So you still got go forward, the ball's moving, and there's low rucks. And then the next part you add into that was the kicking. So it was like, so if you don't kick the ball, well, you're doing a lot of running, which again brings in more rucks, because the more running, the more opportunity for rucks. So it was like the kicking, we need to kick the ball around sort of 30 times a game. And it's like, how do you get 30 kicks? Well, then you go to your halfback. Okay, my halfback, so I need around 6 to 10 kicks from you. Number 10, 4 to 8 kicks. Centers, 2 each. Wingers, at least 1 each. Fullback, 3 or 4. And you got like sort of between like 18 to 24 around about. So we're like, okay, it starts to get to that deep.
It's unbelievable.
But that was the thing,
No,
right?
hold on, clip that up, and I'm selling that. That's mine now.
Yeah, but that was the thing, right? I just really enjoyed that, and that was all like Alan Jones. So it was like that week that we're in Barbarians, it just started ticking in my head, and it was like it's kind of what I needed in that space, because I found that, like, I don't know if it was just in rugby or where I was at as a person in life, it's kind of like at a dead end. And it felt like when I look back at my life, a lot of the things that I was doing, that I was finding interest in, partying, those sort of things, like I was finding interest in them because I had nothing to stimulate me. So I was finding easy things that were, you go and party, you feel great for a couple of hours, and then the next day, the day after, you're feeling like shit. But then once I had this Barbarians tour, and started getting stimulated like that, when I went to club footy, I was like, fuck, this is unbelievable. This is so much fun. And that was just the beginning. So you imagine that was, what, like 2018?
17.
Yeah, 2017, 18.
18 club, yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's a fair whack of time ago. So that's where it all started, and to where it's at now, I'm still loving it and still being able to enjoy it.
How do you manage? Obviously, you're the conductor of the orchestra. The 10 in most teams is the conductor of the orchestra. Slightly different in France, if anywhere. But how do you then manage that with the coaching approach? So because that link needs to be super smooth, right, with regards to working with a coach to be able to deliver their strategy, but ultimately you control it.
For sure. Well, I think that was one of my challenges earlier on in my career. Well, not earlier on, so maybe through that period where I said I was at a dead end. I didn't manage those relationships well at all. And I think that was purely just a place where I was at as a person, as a man. But I think it's super important to be able to have conversations where no one's trying to be right, where it's about learning. I think having an open mind. So you go to your coach and see how they understand the game. And I had some great conversations with Dave Rennie around how he saw the game, and I learned a hell of a lot off him as well. But being able to have those conversations and then also challenge his opinions. Okay, so you're seeing the game like this. I'm sort of seeing it like this. Why do you see it like that? And have a back and forth. And it's like, by doing that, not only will you get the respect of your coach, but you start to understand your coach, so that when your coach is giving you game plans or telling you things about the game, why he wants to do them, you understand it. And you understand it at a high level, not just on okay, we're going to run here and kick the ball here. You understand sort of what makes him tick, why he wants to play like that. And I've even had some of those conversations with Eddie. And I remember the first one we had, I was sort of trying to figure out where he was going with it. Like, okay, if you want to play like this, the way I play the game, it's like this, but hey, that makes sense in a different way. I actually like that. Let me think about that for a week. go away and think about it, and you start to uncover, sort of why he wants that. And I just love having those conversations, whether it's about rugby, whether it's about life, health and well-being and everything. So I think it's just good conversation to have. And if you can keep an open mind, and take your ego out of it, because when your ego's there, you want to be right, but also if there's some type of criticism in your idea, you take it personally.
Yeah.
Well, I'm hoping that the way you boys play this weekend, you're going with the no ruck rule.
Yeah, well, that's
trying to limit the rucks.
I think that's like most teams around the world at the moment, I think have an element of that, but it's not articulated in the same way. So if you watch games, like a lot of teams are kicking sort of within 2-3 phases. Like not many teams will play more than 3 phases to get to a kick. So it's hard and fast. So
Ren's loved the short side.
Yeah, well, there you go.
He loved it,
same
didn't he?
sort of thing, right? So he loved going down a short side, and short side looking for kick opportunities. And again, so if you go down the short side, the numbers are always in your favour. And if they're not, well, there's going to be numbers somewhere else. So I think that most teams have that type of mindset. Offloads are huge in the game now. So ball movement. So if you think about, if a team doesn't pass the ball, and I remember playing South Africa in 2021 in Brisbane, we went through their stats, and the week before when we played them on the Gold Coast, they had 1 pass from the forward. So you go into the next week and you go, okay, when there's a forward pod off the halfback and they've only had 1 pass in 80 minutes, you can go up and put some real heat on them. Yeah. So if you think about double tackles, if you look at a team's stat sheet and their forward pack has passed the ball, let's say 20 times in the game, every time there's a pod in front of you, what are you going to do? You're going to have one-on-one tackles, because you're so aware, if I'm defending next to you and I'm going to defend this person, you're defending that person, you're not coming in for a double hit, because he might pass the ball, because there's a high chance, if you break that down to a percentage, and it's like there's a 30% chance he passes the ball. Well, you might want to bite in, and you come in and bite in, and he tips the ball and goes straight through that hole, or just gets a little bit of front foot ball, throws out our whole defensive structure. That's how the game's played, So I think that the way that the game's played might not be articulated in the same way, but I think that it's more so going towards that direction, which is healthy for the game.
Yeah, so and again, it go back to playing with Finn Russell, the way that he sees the game. Like again, I probably had a preconceived idea of you. You love throwing it about, you love putting those kicks in, but there's so much homework behind it.
For sure.
That goes into it. Sometimes people see the front of it and go, well, no, that's just the way he likes to play. Finn is exactly the same. He will read absolutely everything, go through every play. He'll have boys coming in left, right and centre, but no one sees that side of Finn.
Yeah.
And they see him getting on the piss. And so it's a similar story with him in the way that he looks at the game and plays the game, and that's why things come off.
Yeah, and I think that there's definitely an art to it, and there is a lot of hard work that goes into it. I probably had the same opinion when I watch him play. It's like you just see the flashy things and the fun things that he does. Like, I don't know him, so I don't understand the work that goes into it, but I understand it from the work that I put in. So I look at him and I go, that wasn't just off the cuff. Like that wasn't just something he had a crack at. Like some of the skills you have a crack at, but you also practice those skills. So when I make a break and I've done like a flick pass, I can do that in my sleep because I do it so often. I practice it a lot. So when I go to that and I know I get to this person, he jams in, I can get that pass away. It's not just I'm there guessing, he bites in and I quickly try and react. You've sort of done homework, understanding defenses, teams' defenses, their structures, but also your own attack.
This week's going to be hard though. I mean, look at that World 15 team. Trying to analyse that. There's no computers down there, is there? And laptops looking through it.
Yeah, well, mate, there's some world class athletes. Some of the best athletes in the world you're going to be going up against, and some of that just takes effort. You just got to go in and give your best. And so we played against Izzy, was it 2 weeks ago now, in one of the relegation promotion games. Yeah. And the same thing, right? I said to the boys, because they were watching tape on him, I said, look, understand that it's good to know what you think he's going to do, but he's a phenomenal athlete, so you're not going to stop him. So don't be hard on yourself if you don't stop him. Just try your best to contain him and we limit his opportunities. And it sort of goes back to the same sort of thing. I said, they're going to get looks in this area. If we put pressure in these areas and he gets the ball in this position, hey, we're going to have a better opportunity of slowing him down, keeping him contained in this area. And again, that's all you can really do. So it's like, limit their team's opportunities, we'll limit his, and the same thing going up against this game.
He's the ultimate professional as well. Again, you get a conceived idea of him and you see these incredible athletes. But I was down at the Lensbury at the World 15 yesterday, and the bloke had just turned up. I saw him walk in with his suitcase, put his suitcase into the lobby and pulled out his boots, and he walked past and I said, "Where are you off to?" He's like, "Oh, I've got to go run off the jet lag." And you think, you're coming into these environments where a lot of it is about getting on the beers and having a good time with the boys, but straight away he knows, right, I've got a job to do this weekend.
Yeah, and it's not only this weekend. Like when you're so I always look at it like this: there's professional athletes and then there's paid athletes. And the thing is, the difference is professional athletes, it's a lifestyle. Paid athletes, they get paid to go and play rugby, and they do it on weekends. So the thing is that, so myself and Samu, we get off the plane, same thing, we go do our gym workouts, after our training session do our running and so forth. But you still want to have a good time. But it's bigger than just this week. And the challenge for me always comes in Monday through to Friday. The hard work, the game is always easy. You can always get up for a game. But can you get up for training? So you get better by training every day, or in those workouts and the things that you don't want to do. So Izzy, I'm sure he didn't want to go running after just getting off the plane. Yeah. But knowing that he's gone and done that will give him a better opportunity to perform on Saturday.
You mentioned that lifestyle, that drive. I assume that there's been some extra fire to that, given that you've had a bit of time off with injury. You know, you talk with such passion about the game, proper scholar of the game. Not always easy, therefore, to spend months on the sidelines, essentially not being able to put your best out there. But how much is that fueling the fire now? You know, Barbarians as a stepping stone on Sunday, you want to go out and put in a big performance, but how much hunger do you have for staking a claim for the Wallabies, for pushing towards the World Cup? Yeah,
well, it's funny you mentioned that, is that my hunger is for the training, for the daily.
Is it? Yeah.
For real. And the thing is, I actually really enjoyed being injured.
Really?
Yeah, because it's like, the way I looked at it is that, the game I've played since I was 4 years of age. The training side of it is the challenge, is the hard part. As I said, it's very easy to get up for a game. If you haven't, you see guys who play in these classic games who haven't trained at all for years, get caught up, play a classic Wallabies versus classic New Zealand or something like that, and these guys go out there and still can play. But they can't do the training every day, or they don't want to do the training every day. And some days I don't want to train. Like throughout this injury process, there was days where I was frustrated, days where I was happy, sad, and so forth. But just getting into those habits, the routines, and being able to do that, that's the real challenge. And it's like, so for me, the fire and the hunger is for that. The games, I know that if I perform well in these days, so let's say out of 365 days in the year, you train 300 days. Those 300 days are a lot more challenging to get up for 300 days of training than 15 games of rugby. So if you have 5 bad training sessions within those 300, well, what's the chances of you having a bad game? You might have a bad half, you might have a bad run of play, but you're not going to have 5 bad games if you live at that level throughout your training. So that's where, for me, I get the hunger for the process. And everybody, you hear a lot of people say, sort of trust the process, work hard in the process, but what is your process? So for me, I've been able to nail that down to a finite science of what it takes for me to be at a certain level and how I approach that every day.
Now I understand the boxing. You're 3 out of 3 in the boxing, right? Park the championship coming up, park the World Cup. Is there something you want to go into? Because again, there's a process of that, and the training is grueling. Or are you going to switch over to league?
I think I'm definitely too old for league these days. But boxing is something that I've always wanted to do. Me and Sonny always have conversations about it, because when he was preparing for his last fight, just being in camp with him, I was about 8 weeks into my rehab for my Achilles at the time, and I was with him preparing for boxing. And it's just boxing's the ultimate sport of you have to do everything on your own. So you have to get to a level that you can go out and train when no one's there to help you. When it's cold, wet, you get up and you go run, you get up and you go punch a bag, you go up and train without anyone being there. And that's probably one of the upsides to COVID. That's something that I learned throughout that period, was when everything kind of got cancelled and everybody got sent home and was locked up in their homes. It was like, okay, right now, no one's training, or no one has to train. No one has to do anything. So there's no, you talk about motivation. Well, what are you getting up and training for? There's nothing that can happen. Yeah. So for me, it was getting up, going training every day, finding a way to train, actually learning about how to train. So learning about my diet, learning about the type of workouts that are going to benefit me, how I'm going to get better, how I stop myself from getting injured, how I prevent myself from being injured, give myself the best opportunity to stay healthy. And then just being able to build all those habits throughout that time, so that when you do go back into a system, so going back into rugby, so whether it's Wallabies or something, and you have a schedule that's already planned for you, you're going to do gym at this time. For me, I look at that now as like the bare minimum. So I'll wake up, I'll go do gym, I'll go do stretching, do certain things, then I'll join in on the team stuff. And it's like, so for me, that period of time was what changed everything. And you look, as you said, you allude to with boxing, that's something where you don't have a team. Or you do in some ways, but you don't have a schedule. You got to come up with that yourself. And if you don't feel like it, you can change it. So it's being able to stick to things when, even if you don't want to do them, being able to stick to them. And that was me throughout this Achilles rehab process. I had my trainer. I built my own schedule and had to stick to it. But it was like, I could have changed. If I didn't feel like training on Monday morning, I could, I'm just going to sleep in today and do it at 2 o'clock in the Arvo. No one's going to care, no one's going to know, it's just up to me. But waking up at 5 and just going and doing it, although I didn't want to some days, it's so much more beneficial for myself, for my mindset, and then that's something that will hold me in good stead whenever I come into an environment like this where there is a lot of chaos around.
Well, it's the man in the mirror, isn't it?
For sure.
Wait till you have kids, that throws a spanner in the works.
Yeah,
that's my excuse. Yeah. 4 kids.
Yeah,
that's probably why I've held out so long.
Exactly. When it comes to how you feel physically, relative to the peak of your powers, where are you now? Because you're obviously looking after yourself. You know what it takes to prepare yourself. You've come through an injury. Where do you feel? How do you feel physically now compared to the very peak of your powers?
How old are you?
35.
35?
Yeah. Like physically I feel great. And the thing is, and again, I have these conversations with a lot of people, because I actually had this conversation with Dave Rennie when I first met him about coming into camp. And I was three and a half months into my 6 months holiday. And we sat down, he said, what sort of shape are you in? Like, if you're going to be coming into camp, I just want to make sure you're in good shape. And I said, mate, I'm in 3.5 months into my holiday. This is what I do for training every day. Like, I don't have to do that. And I said, if I walk away from this meeting, you don't want me to come into camp, this is what I'm going to continue to do. So it's not about, I'm not doing that to come into camp. I haven't been working for 2 weeks to try and get into shape to prove to you that I can come into camp. I'm just doing this regardless, because this is who I am. And that to me is the most important part, is being able to do that without anything guaranteed for you. Or you're not necessarily working towards making a team. So for me, this is how I work out and who I am. So I'm in good shape, not because I want to go to the World Cup. It's just because that's who I am, and I make it part of my identity. Now, if I'm picked for the World Cup, I know that the level that I've been living at will be at a high level. So I know that if I'm up. Exactly, so I don't have to try and chase something. I don't need to try and, okay, all of a sudden I need to turn it on for this 6 weeks. And that's what I said to Dave was, he said the boys have been training hard for 5 weeks, and essentially I said, well, great, that's 5 weeks. Like, let's be happy when the boys have done that for a year, for 2 years, and then it's just part of who they are. Because 5 weeks, you look on social media, there's all these 5 week, 6 week challenges, people lose weight, they get in good shape, and then when they get to that finish line, then what?
Fall off the cliff again.
Exactly, so it's a cycle.
Yeah.
Whereas if you use those 6 weeks as your base just to be who you are, and it's like pre-season, you hear athletes all the time, whenever they get interviewed, in the first week just before the season's about to kick off, they say, pre-season's been tough. It's been a hard slog for 4 to 6 weeks, and I'm in the best shape of my life. Aesthetically, you might be. You've just done that for 4 weeks. You know what I mean? So it's like, for me, my mindset, my perception is coming to that pre-season at this level, that's your normal. So that has to be your normal. So when you go into the season, you're still trying to get better. So you're still trying to trend upwards, rather than you get to a peak and then you're trying to hold it or just minimize the decrease throughout the season, because that's such a bad way to look at it. Pre-season is not where the season's won. The finals are all the way over here. So if the finals over here and you're actually on a downward trend, like, it's just not smart.
When it comes to, we'll get into the BaaBaas, this week leading into the World 15 and the excitement around that. But we sat down with Eddie and asked him about his ambitions with the Wallabies and a rugby championship, then into World Cup. He says the only option is for the Wallabies to win the World Cup. How much does that excite you as a player with an opportunity to push for the Wallabies squad? And then beyond that, is there a genuine belief, do you feel, within the Australian playing group and management that that's something that's achievable? Yeah,
I'd be silly to say that that's not within every single international team's mindset. I think that every international team will be thinking that if you're there at the tournament, you've got an opportunity. Now, we only know how we're going about our business, right? So individually, I know how I'm looking after myself. I'm here with Samu, I know how he's looking after himself. And together, we're looking after each other as well, so we're pushing each other to be better.
How do you guide those who maybe aren't, you look at now as a senior guy, right? Because being able to influence others who you can maybe see making some errors that you may have made historically, how do you hold them to account or guide them differently?
By how you hold yourself. So the biggest thing is that, so for me, if I'm training at a certain level during this Barbarians test, and there's guys around me, younger guys around me that can see that, it's all infectious, right? And so it's a strength in numbers thing. If I'm doing it and Samu's doing it, there's two. Now, if we're doing it together in the first Wallaby squad, and like if we get announced in the squad, and there's two of us doing it, I guarantee there'll be another two that join, and so forth. And you get a bit of momentum in that way. And if guys are already doing that, you know what I mean? So guys are already doing that, and we get into a collective. Well, you bring up the minority. Now, when it's a bad situation is when you're the minority. You're the only one in that. But it doesn't mean it's not achievable. You can still have a great effect. And I know I have a big influence on people, not just my teammates in the Wallabies, but people in general. So for me, I try and put that message out there. And the more lives you can change or more people you can help move in a positive direction, well, there's a huge flow-on effect.
You mentioned, ego earlier on, and a lot said around the Barbarians is leave your ego at the door and come in, right? This is a group with some young guys who you probably have never seen play before, then some other guys who you'll have played alongside or watched play, and then obviously a number who you've played against. What have you learned so far? And we're only 24 hours or so in, but when you've got guys like Alan Wynne-Jones, 170 caps, Wales and Lions combined, but then also some guys who have never been caps. What have your learnings been so far with regards to the connections built?
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing, is just building connections with your teammates and that. So whether that's on the training paddock and some of the functions that you go to and stuff like that, just the conversations. It's great to be able to link with some of these younger guys, some of the older guys. I was sitting in a cab with Alwyn on the way to dinner last night. And, I actually hadn't spent much time with him ever, so it was just great having a little yarn, bit of banter back and forth. He was telling me about, his castle he has on the beach somewhere in Swansea, I believe it is.
The Mumbles probably,
and
I would have thought.
It's called the Valleys, mate.
Well, there you go. But when he mentioned beach, I had to chuckle, and I said, beach, is it with sand? And he turns and looks at me and says, righto, you little prick. And but it was just, mate, great having a conversation with him, and then at dinner sitting next to one of the young boys and just having a chat about some of the things he likes to do, the way he plays the game, where he plays the game, things like that. I just really enjoy these opportunities.
This is going to be a unique game on the Sunday against the World 15. Typically, the BaaBaas play international teams who come with that structure and the systems, and I guess that knowledge and continuity in a lot of cases, but also the jeopardy. People don't want to lose to the Barbarians, and I'm sure the World 15 it'll be exactly the same. But what do you expect from Sunday when you've essentially got two teams thrown together, players who haven't played together but are desperate to go out there and express themselves and win?
Yeah, I think that when you have two teams that have just extraordinary talent to start with, and some of the best players in the world, you're going to get good football. So even some of the conversations we had at training, it's very easy to kind of throw together a structure. A lot of the calls are quite universal. So I think that most teams play a similar way, but there's a lot of individuals in this team that will step up and have extraordinary outings. But as teams, these weeks are all about bonding. So that's where you get, and I remember the game in Australia. Mate, we bonded like no other. And then if you look at how we played that game, you just know someone's there. Yeah. Because it's just the level of respect that's earned throughout that week just makes for the best games of footy. So
also the fear, I think. If you're not behind him, someone's made a break and you're not there, they know you've been on the beer.
Yeah, for sure.
The fear gets you.
Exactly. So there is an element of fear. There's element of respect and pride for each other as well. But again, you just got best players in the world on the footy paddock with a license to go out there and just play. And
how excited are you to get back into the black and white stripes of the BaaBaas jersey? It's been a few years, but not only I guess you mentioned it's easy to get up for games, but how much excitement comes with the BaaBaas and the proper opportunity to go out and express.
And I'll tag on to that. And why is it so important? Because we'll leave this as the last one. I know you've only got. We've kept you too long. Why is it so important as well on that?
No, I just think that the importance of these types of games. If you look at the sport's been around for years, to keep some type of tradition in the game. Because I remember when I first came into the game, you shake hands, you go into the sheds, you mingle with each other. Guys would have a beer, have a yarn and whatnot, and then after that you probably go out to the pub or whatever together. A few years on from that, it's a quick shake your hands after the game. You're on a flight, they're on a flight, you don't see them, you don't even interact really. Most interaction you get with other teammates and other guys from other teams is on social media. So I think having something like this keeps the traditions in a game with so much history. And I know that when I was a young kid growing up, I loved watching Barbarian games, not only for the brand of football that was played, the stories that you heard, but also your favourite players playing with each other. It's just unheard of, So I think that's why it's super important.
It's going to be an unbelievable spectacle on Sunday, and we're looking forward to you being at the helm. How many points is it going to take for the BaaBaas to win the game?
Oh man, I'll throw it out there. I think after playing in Japan, when you're in Japan, it's kind of like there's usually around 80 points scored per game, between both teams, so average 40-40, right? So I'd imagine it would have to be somewhere in the realms of 40 points to win.
That's what the people want. That's what the people want.
Quade, it's been so good, so insightful, brilliant to get into that wizardry mind, and all the best on Sunday. Enjoy the rest of your week before that, though.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, brother.